back, everybody, or welcome to Coffee with Kelly. And once again, I'm Kelly Appleby, the mental health lead for the Thames Valley District School Board. And this is our extended full cup of coffee conversation with the Director of Education for the Thames Valley District School Board, Mark Fisher. Thank you for joining me, Mark.
That's my pleasure, and I'm happy to be here for the extended cup of coffee.
Yeah. So once again, it's sort of this is the final episode of Mental Health Week. So we're going to just dive right into continuing to talk about well-being as it relates to education, because it's also Education Week. So it's actually a fine time to be able to talk about both. On Monday, I had Dr. David Tranter on my episode, and he wrote a book called The Third Path, Relationship-Based Education. And he sort of talks about centering the connection and the relationship with the student sort of in the center of their learning, essentially. And that when there is a relationship and a connection, that the learning sort of is more likely to happen out of that, and achievement is more likely to happen out of that. And so I'm curious, we've already talked about that a little bit in our sip of coffee, but what are your thoughts, I guess, about that supporting the well-being of students in the classroom is first and foremost about the relationships and connections that we build with them?
Well, I think I agree with most of that.
Yeah.
I think that there's a layer that potentially is missing from an educational perspective.
Yeah.
So I think that, to me, it's obvious that if the relationship and the connection is not there, then no student will achieve their potential.
Right.
So we need to find ways to connect. Students need to feel safe at school. They need to know that there's a caring adult in that space. And those are preconditions for learning to happen. But once those conditions are in place, we actually need to think about the learning itself. And part of a student's well-being is around, is the learning that they are presented with relevant to their lived experience, representative of what their needs are, and it is responsive to where they will be going. So are we putting work in front of students that is actually stimulating creativity, innovation, thinking, application, or are we feeding students a steady diet of low-level replication, things that really aren't relevant for them? So you can have those relationships pieces and be the nicest person in the world, but if you are not challenging students, if you are not being responsive to their needs, if you are not really individualizing their learning, and I think this is, Kelly, the biggest shift. So if we want to get really deep about education, so we're working really on an industrial model, a factory model of the delivery of education based on an agrarian calendar, and we're trying to do that in 2020. So we're trying to mass produce things that really no longer work for society or for kids. So it's all about precision and personalization and individualization. So how do we actually know what students' learning needs and gaps are? And then how do we put in interventions or resources or supports in place that address those individual learning gaps and do it in a way that those students feel connected and supported, and we don't have a punitive thing. So all of those things need to go together for students really to maximize their potential, which is why, you know, the whole art and science of education is really so challenging.
Yeah, and it's sort of the wicked challenge of education in so many ways. Yeah, and perhaps it could be said at the same time that for providing learning opportunities where students can feel like they can engage in and be excited about and that they see themselves in. There's an element of that helps them feel seen and cared for and understood, and that they're at the center, and that's really about a relationship too.
It's about relationships, and it's actually about this idea of personalization. So what is it that you, Kelly, need as a learner? Where are your gaps? And if you're from a traditionally marginalized community, where is your lived experience reflected and represented in what it is that you do and what it is that you learn?
Yeah.
So all of our educators, we have to continually challenge ourselves to evolve and to stay current. And I think there's a couple of really interesting examples. So when you and I went to school, there was a real premium on knowledge and being able to find knowledge and source it out and go to the library and look through books and to be able to be persistent and find that piece of information, and then having that information and knowing that information and being able to recall that information, that was a really important skill because it was really difficult to find. Today, any piece of information like that, I can find in 30 seconds.
With your thumb.
So, with my thumb. So the skill today is around how can you delineate or discriminate between that information. So how am I able to tell the difference between what is fact and what is opinion? And how do I take all of this information that I have and apply it in a way that's going to build knowledge or move things forward and create? So the whole paradigm needs to shift. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that those students, all of our students, feel a sense of connectedness to the school so that they feel valued, they feel honored, they feel a part of what's going on, they feel listened to. So it's not this old approach where, you know, they say the sage on the stage where the teacher would be up front lecturing and then you'd be the empty vessel taking it all in. It's no, you want an engagement back and forth so that together we can take this piece of information or this knowledge and build on it and apply it in a way that I as a learner or as a student think makes sense, right?
That's a pretty big shift in paradigm in some ways, isn't it?
The whole thing needs to shift, right?
So in this time of sort of emergency distance learning, what do you think that, what do you think we've learned about the importance of relationships and connections with our students? Like how has that been made more obvious? I think that the importance of it been made more obvious.
Well, one of the things I'm hearing from students is that they like this many of them like switching to a digital and online platform. So we had some sort of trepidation previously about what online learning could and would be. So we've been able to clear some of those hurdles. But what I'm also hearing loud and clear is our students miss that direct connection with teachers. And they miss the direct connection with their peers. And that a big part of learning is a social construct. And so when you're not with other people directly, then it's difficult for us to kind of, you know, engage in a way that we really, really want to engage. So we're doing our best through all kinds of really exciting strategies, but ultimately kids want to be together, students want to learn together. And so really what I think what we'll learn moving out of this is just how important it is to kind of work together, to work in groups, and that really will never be completely replaced by these digital platforms, but the digital platforms in some ways can supplement what it is that we're trying to do.
So you have been in the classroom in your career. You back in the day, you were a classroom teacher. And if you could just for a second put yourself back in that place and imagine that you were a classroom teacher at this time, and all of a sudden on a dime having to change the way that you know to teach kids and the way that you feel competent in teaching kids, and put yourself back there and just imagine, like, what do you imagine that would have been like for you, just thinking about what it's like currently for all of our educators?
I think I talked briefly about this during our sip of coffee, but really we're taking a system that's been in place for over 100 years and really on a dime, on the fly, we're shifting that whole interaction between students and teachers. And if we were going to do this under typical or normal circumstances, it would probably take years and years of planning and prototyping and piloting. And so we're doing this really on the fly while we are honoring all of the physical distance and social distancing measures. So
Yeah.
really, I want to commend all of our teachers and educators for how well they are doing this.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got survey results coming in from the community now that are just overwhelmingly positive. Our research and assessment team called it a sea of love. So it's around families and students saying that they're getting the information that they need from teachers and principals. And it's also this challenge of how do you assign work in a way that is equivalent to the expectations in terms of hours for completion. That's really challenging, but we have, I think, over 80% of our community saying, yeah, they're getting just the right amount of work. 10% say too much, 10% say too little. So we're kind of in that sweet spot. So I think, to your question, really, when I was a teacher, like, what was foundational to me is how do you build connections with each of your students? So how do your approach has to alter. So not everybody responds to the same style, right? So it's trying to build those relationships, getting to know your students individually and finding out what actually motivates them or what influences them to move forward. So our teachers have that information, and now we've switched to a digital platform. It's really reaching out to our families to find out what is working and what is not working. And I talked a little bit about this before. This is this willingness to be open to feedback. So when we put something forward, whether it's a lesson, whatever it is, how do we know that it's having its intended impact? And the only way to do that is to be vulnerable, open yourself up, and say, is this really working for you, or is this not working for you? And I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to model that as a director, that we are consistently and constantly open to feedback. One of the things that my communications team encouraged me to do was I do this weekly 5-minute social media chat where I take questions from the broad community, and those questions are unfiltered, and I do my best in a more relaxed, informal manner to try to answer those questions. And then when we get certain themes that come in about what we're doing well, we celebrate those successes. When we get themes that are coming in about where we are struggling a little bit, then we try to adapt and respond to that. So it's around, the fundamentals of good pedagogy don't change whether you're face-to-face or whether you're in a virtual environment. You need to connect with your students. You need to give them tasks that are intellectually engaging, that are just enough out of their, zone of development that they're pushing themselves. And then you need to be open to feedback from the community about, is it working or not, and what has to shift. And wherever possible, you have to honor people's individual circumstances. So we have to recognize that not every family has the social capital to engage in the learning at the exact time we may want that learning to happen. And so we have to be really open to different ways of learning and different ways of assessment. But if we focus on feedback and we focus on assessment, this can actually be a great opportunity for us to apply new ways of teaching and learning that will be really advantageous when we come back at some point in our face-to-face.
So all the things that you just talked about, like what comes through my head is like no easy task for educators to sort of pivot like that and take all of these different things, and get no easy task. And I had a coffee conversation with one of our educators on Wednesday, and she shared very vulnerably in some ways some of the ways in which she has experienced some of the feelings that she's sort of roller coastered through during this time, and most notably sort of put it out there that like sometimes overwhelm and anxiety around, am I doing this right, or am I doing this virtual thing right? Sometimes a sense of insecurity about like competence as a professional. This isn't how I know myself to be as a teacher, and so feeling a little insecure about that. And and although she's one person and doesn't speak for the whole system, I would suspect that there's some commonality in there somewhere amongst our educators.
Well, I have a couple of comments there. So one of the things, our strategic priorities, our operational plan this year, we called it Momentum 1920. So to me, it's all around continuous forward progress. So it's not about perfection. And
Yeah.
really, to my earlier comments, we don't need our teachers to be the experts in everything. We need them to facilitate and coach and set up conditions for learning to provoke and stimulate interaction. And so if, as a teacher, and we had a significant percentage of our teachers identify to us that they weren't comfortable with many of these digital learning platforms, and they have in huge numbers been willing and able to go and participate in the training that we have provided. So it's not that you have to be an expert, but if you're willing to learn with and from and alongside your students, you're actually modeling what it is that we need to do forward. Because what are the skills right now that are helping me as the director of education thrive? There's no training for a global pandemic. At no point in my 25-year career in education before I became director did someone say, I hope you're ready for the pandemic. Like, I took course after course.
And this is what you need to do.
Yeah, multiple degrees, multiple training things. The idea, how do you as a large school system respond to a pandemic, never came up, not once in 25 years.
No, me neither.
So I didn't need a subject expert on response to pandemics. It's really around, how do you stay calm? How do you take in information? How do you make decisions? And then how do you accept that when you make decisions, not everybody is going to be really happy with you, but you have to do the decisions that you think are in the best interest of your students? How do you have guiding principles that move yourself forward? So to the teachers out there, I applaud you for this new learning that you're doing. I don't expect you to be proficient from day one. I expect you to, put yourself out there. And one of the things that I've done with my superintendents and with my principals is I want to create a culture. We use the Culture Code book as a guiding philosophical document, is that I'm going to set the expectations and the direction for the system together with the senior team based on data research. And then the people that are implementing that, I want them to feel comfortable exposing or expressing, I'm struggling because of, and then it's our job to provide you the tools and toolkit and support that you need to overcome those challenges. And if you struggle with that, that's not your issue, right? That is our issue to set that up for you. And so one of the things we're really trying to do is put training out there on how to use some of these platforms, how to use Brightspace, how to use Google Meets. So some of these ones that are sanctioned and safe, because there's a lot of other ones that are easy in the short term, like Seesaw and Remind, that really have some safety concerns and complications. So it's okay for our teachers and our principals to feel, that, they don't always have to feel 100% confident, but if they're willing to grow and learn and develop, that's really what we're looking for.
I think that what you might be talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you might be talking about is vulnerability. And that concept, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, came up with my Coffee with Kelly with a 17-year-old student, where we talked a lot about the need for vulnerability at this time, and really any time when it comes to supporting our own mental health and well-being and success. So I think that is a bit about what you're sort of referring to, as like being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know, and then opening yourself up to sort of sitting in that discomfort and then learning what you need to learn, right?
Right.
So I think that takes me to this thought of there's a common humanity that binds us all right now in a way that I'm not sure our planet has experienced in recent times. And this common humanity of we are all in this. We've had lots of difficult times in our communities and in our countries, but sometimes, some people are a bit more removed from actually what's happening. We are all in it at the same time. And that's not something that's happened in recent times. And so this common humanity of you're in it as much as I'm in it, as much as everybody in our community's in it. And we can share that experience together of navigating it. So, you are Mark Fisher, Director of Education. That's one identity that you hold. And you also hold an identity as a as a husband, you hold an identity as a father, you hold an identity as a son to the two elderly parents. So you can also speak to experiencing this time from those perspectives as well. And I'm wondering if you'd just be willing to share, like, we all know how hard the balance quote is of all the roles that we're trying to hold right now. And as you are trying to run a system and be a husband and be a father and be a son. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit to some of those sort of human challenges that you're experiencing.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way you frame that. I think one of the things I want to say, just from the professional context here at Thames Valley, is I've only been here since August.
I know.
This has really been an opportunity during crisis to really see the best of many people. And I have a core group of people on my senior team that have just really risen to the occasion. And it's really this whole approach of, what is it that we need to do? Let's establish our guiding principles, this do no harm philosophy for both students and for staff. And to try to make sure that we keep people safe, but we keep the learning moving forward. And the entire system, we have 10,000 employees, the entire system has had to shift on a dime in terms of the way we do the work that we do. But we come together and we try to problem solve, and we put things in place. We want to make sure that payroll continues. We want to make sure that our schools get cleaned. We want to make sure that the devices that get deployed, and we want to make sure that we stay in regular contact with our community. So we're doing all those things. So it actually is a bonding experience, and you get to know people on a deeper level than perhaps you would have in the typical, when things moving so fastly in one direction, right? And then the fact that I have two children, I have a daughter in grade 10, 16 years old, and I have a 9-year-old son in grade 4. So like many people, I am juggling the responsibilities of keeping the school system moving forward with trying to be a good father. And then, really giving my kids what they need in a time where, they're not, their whole world has really changed. And so I think one of the things I really try to do there is model competence and calmness, so that they are looking to me to see how I am responding to this situation. And I am not trying to be too extreme in terms of the risk for them, in terms of what is out there. But at the same time, trying to teach them the value of taking appropriate precautions. I'm trying to sit down, particularly with my son. We were chatting offline. My daughter I'm very fortunate. She's a really motivated student and kid. And she comes to me and shows me the work that she's doing. So she doesn't need a whole lot of guidance and direction. But interestingly enough, what she does need is creative outlets, so that she needs ways to express her creativity. So one day she'll be, knitting a sweater. The next day she'll be making miniatures. The next day she'll be doing a painting. And I just want to make sure that I continue to, encourage that and provide her with the support and resources she needs. My son, great kid, he's less motivated to get all the schoolwork done. And he needs a lot of support. And I've taken a lot of time on the weekends with him to really show an interest in his work, so that he knows it's important, and help him, identify what's getting in the way. And it's not that he doesn't really want to do it, but he's kind of that mindset. Well, we're not in school. I'll be good when we go back. Like, I don't really need to be doing all this. And so I've taken a lot of time kind of with him just to reinforce. And one of the things there, I recognize my privilege here, and I recognize that I have the social capital to support my children in that. And that's, again, circles back to our do no harm philosophy. There are other families that do not have that circumstance currently. They could be the kids of essential workers. They could be situations where people are unemployed. There's food insecurity, there's economic hardship. So I do not want students in those situations to be disadvantaged in any way because of variables that they can't control. So I want students to engage to the degree that they can engage, and I want our teachers to continue to reach out and be adaptable and to be flexible. And then also, as you said, I have two elderly parents. I have a 81-year-old father that has diabetes, so he's in a kind of a high risk category. And I have my mom is 77 and she has asthma and she has lupus. And
Mhm.
so she's got issues as well. Now, my mom, I learned a lot from her. She is a resilient person. She's an optimistic person, and she's, out walking every morning. And what I'm doing with both of my parents is really maintaining regular social contact. And I, have not gone down to see my mom. I mean, I would love to do that. But I know that I don't want to put her in any jeopardy. And so we try to do things like this with regular FaceTime contacts, and try to talk to her most days, and just to keep that contact so that she, is feeling good about everything. And she's fortunately very interested in everything that happens at Thames Valley District School Board. So I give her lots of updates about what is happening here and how we're navigating that system. So I think it's important, and I've done that also with a couple of my brother and a couple of close friends, where every couple of days we get together on a different platform, and engage in some social stuff and just try to talk and stay connected. And I think that's something that will likely continue once things return to a semblance of normalcy.
Yeah, whatever that will be. I think it's interesting that and I really appreciate you bringing forward the idea of, the privilege that you do, acknowledging the privilege that you do have, and, and even that, that you acknowledge that your son isn't always easy to engage in schoolwork, and the possibility exists. I think you said this to me yesterday, actually. The possibility exists that he could have a label slapped on him of of not engaging, or not being willing, or not motivated. And so even despite having a director of education as a parent who has all the privilege in the world to be able to, the knowledge to be able to push him forward, that he's still struggling to engage sometimes. Right. Yeah. So I think so I have this statement in my mind that I want to say, and then ask you to respond to that. So I think it's true that it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to lead an education system through a time like this, where, like you said, there's no guidebook and there's no blueprint. Nobody taught you how to lead through a pandemic. And I think there's a lot of courage and strength required in order to do that. And then we learned from our grade 12 student who talked to me on Tuesday with a coffee with Kelly. He spoke about this concept of courage and strength, and then himself brought up vulnerability and how that is an element of courage and strength. And he himself said, there is no courage without vulnerability. There is no courage without vulnerability, which was very wise for a 17-year-old young man to say. And so I'm going to suppose that you've had your fair share of moments where you kind of like, holy cow, this is really hard. And, like, just feeling the weight of it. Sometimes those vulnerable type moments, and because you just happen to be human as well, like the rest of us. Those moments where you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and with something on your brain and go, oh my gosh, or the things that keep you up at night. And where does Mark Fisher sort of put that? Where does Mark Fisher, knowing that you have those vulnerable moments, where do you put that, and where does that go, and how do you handle those times?
I think part of it is I've always had a passion for civil service, and I've always had a strong core belief around the value and the merit of public education. So for me, it's very important to be able to do something that I think has value. And I take a lot of responsibility of the fact that we have 80,000 students, and really I have the privilege and the luxury of being able to have a tremendous amount of influence over those students. So
Uh,
that's number one. Number two is an acceptance that I'm going to be able to control certain variables,
mm,
but there are other variables that I'm not going to be able to control.
that's true.
But whether the degree to which I control those variables doesn't negate or lessen the importance of the work that we're trying to accomplish
Mm,
here. And
mhm,
so I need to think about that big picture. So the big picture is, what is the best that we can do under these circumstances and conditions for our community, who probably need those supports more than ever now?
mhm,
And so what are those kind of guiding principles? And that goes back to, the learning needs to continue. I mean, I'm a type of, I remember back to when I was a kid. So there, the structure is important for kids. So if you're in your home 24/7 and there is no structure there, for many in the community, that's not a good thing.
mm,
So I see from both my students and my staff that what is it that we can do, that given the options and the circumstances that we have, what is the best that we can possibly do right now? And really, what is it that we can learn from what we are doing? And what I find when you go to situations like this, some of the things that are a little less important or more frivolous seem to get stripped away.
mm,
So we go down to what at our core, why are we here and what are we doing? And so I take a lot of satisfaction in the fact that we are able to pivot and transform a system that, frankly, in my view, there's things that need transformation,
mhm,
right? There's a
mhm.
lot of things. I mean, this is not the way I ideally would have organized it, but I
Okay.
think our whole system, I'm a big believer in leading change and personalization. And so this is allowing us to move forward into some of these spaces. It's allowing us to kind of intentionally interrupt some practices that have just continued because of convention rather than really any other reason. But you're
Mm.
right, Kelly, there are nights where I think, you know, we had, if I take a look at this year, this is my first year as a director,
Yes.
something I've been working my entire career. And
Yes.
and it's really the reason I continue to pursue formal positions of leadership was just around this whole idea of influence and the idea that I could work with really good, high quality people and we could influence change in a way that would ultimately benefit kids and in a way that would give kids an opportunity. I was born in Prince Edward Island. I was born in the Maritimes. I came to Ontario as a very young child,
Mm,
and the public education system really it's done a lot for me and for a lot of people that I know. And that's one of the reasons that I'm such a big believer in it, because I think it's an opportunity. It gives people an opportunity to really elevate their social station and achieve things when it's done properly, right?
yeah.
It's an opportunity to remove barriers for people. So right
Mm,
now, we are servicing and identifying lots of barriers for students that we may have taken for granted. I don't know that we knew as much about people's home circumstances as we do now, right? I talked to you about the 1,000 families in the district that have no access to the internet, the 13,000 families that required devices to actually do distance learning, right? So these are just things that we need to think about moving forward.
mm.
So sometimes at night, I think this is a lot. We had the biggest labor unrest in 20 years, which thankfully is in the process of all being resolved.
Yes. Yes.
So a lot of people thought that seemed like a big challenge at the time, and trying to maintain those really positive
Yes.
relationships as we work through that whole process. And then all of a sudden, boom, we have COVID-19 and everything else shifts, right? But it's around, this has given me an opportunity to connect more deeply with the people I work with than I probably would have in years and years and years.
Mhm.
It's given me an opportunity to reinforce my belief in what our core values, this do no harm philosophy, this idea of being relevant and responsive to student needs. Um, but even with all those things, there have been times where it's been,
Yeah.
could we get a little bit of good news coming
Right.
coming in here,
Right.
right? Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so it's knowing that I'm working with a team of really committed people. It's knowing that I'm doing the best that I can.
Yeah.
And this is probably this lesson that I've talked to before. Each
Mm,
year, as my career has progressed, I've become more and more open to feedback. And this is
Mhm.
what I teach young leaders. And when I talk about leaders and leadership, I'm talking about influence. I'm not talking about position. So you can be a leader no matter what position you have in the organization. But it's being open to feedback and not personalizing feedback and not
Mhm.
making it about you as a person, right? It's really trying to take what people are saying about the efforts that you're putting forward, sifting through that and trying to pull out some of those lessons that can then be applied to improve, and having this idea or philosophy that we're constantly evolving, we're constantly improving. And you and I talked offline that
Mhm.
the only constant in education is change. That was true before this pandemic,
Yeah.
and it's definitely true now. And really, we just have to accept that that is
Yeah.
the way it will be. And I do want to tell people that are listening to this, it's not going to be a matter of in September or in June just turning the tap back on and
No,
life is going to go back to normal. That will not happen.
it's so true.
There's going to be all kinds of challenges and adaptations that we're going to have to make. But we've proven over the last 6 weeks that we can do this. Like, look what we have done in Ontario, in Thames Valley District School Board.
Remarkable.
Like, I have the stats. It is staggering what we
Yeah.
have done and what we have accomplished. And
Yeah.
it's up and it's running and it's going well right now, which
Mm.
is really
Mhm.
amazing, right? So
Yeah. So a little bit of a blueprint for what we are capable of
that's
as
right.
a system. When you talk about sort of being open to feedback, and as you've gone on in your career, that's something that's something that you hold as a value. There's a great deal of vulnerability in being open to feedback
Right.
and to hearing what people have to say about you and what you do. There's a great deal of vulnerability in that, and at the same time, I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but like vulnerability isn't necessarily a word that is used first to describe, like in the traditional sense of describing masculinity, right? It's
Right.
not really the first word that comes to mind for most people when we try to describe sort of the traditional stereotype of what masculinity is.
Right.
Yet again, I'll mention Mooney, my 17-year-old guest on Tuesday, where he's blowing that conversation up about healthy masculinity and how that relates to the well-being of young men and boys, and that vulnerability is at the center of that. Is a really important piece of mental health,
Right.
well-being, and
Right.
masculinity. So I don't know if you have any, as a leader, as a male, as I don't know if you have any comments about that. I'm curious.
I think it's also I think role modeling is important.
Oh,
And I think establishing conditions of trust and safety and not just expecting vulnerability to happen immediately, and
mm,
recognizing that, when I came into this organization, people didn't know who I was. I'm from somewhere else. And
yes.
so I found that resource in the culture code that talked about establishing a purpose. So I think we need to have a purpose, and that is probably the role of the senior leaders to establish the
Mm,
purpose in the organization. And then it's up to us as we implement that to create conditions of safety so that people are actually willing to expose themselves. And the way I look at it is, how are you ever going to improve as an individual
yeah.
or as a collective if you're not willing to look inside yourself and to see, where is it that I'm kind of struggling here a little bit?
Mm,
And how as a system or a person can I move forward if I fundamentally don't know what is getting in my way? So I
mhm,
got to take that to a learning thing. So if I think of the assessment loop, if you're a student that's learning how to read or learning how to write or learning how to do mathematics, I can't just give every single kid in the class the same intervention. I need to actually know what, for you, Kelly, is actually getting in the way so I can personalize what it is you need to achieve. So if you're somebody in the workforce or you're doing whatever it is you're doing, here are the conditions that we're in. Here's what I'm expecting or asking of you. I need you to feel safe, or I need to create conditions around you where you're going to say, okay, I understand, but this is where I'm struggling and here is why.
mhm,
And
mhm,
to do that in a way that you're not going to feel judged or you're not going to feel incompetent, but in
mhm,
fact, you're going to feel more competent. And this goes to this whole notion of improvement versus perfection. So if people are striving for perfection constantly, they're never going to achieve that, and they're always going to feel inadequate. But if you're thinking, no matter what, I'm always going to get a little bit better. And then if I have a setback, there's a great Japanese proverb that I, go back and read regularly, and it's just fall down 7 times, stand up 8. So it's really when things happen, you take that information, you try to learn from the experience, you try to accept what your role, even if it was small, in that was, and you try to then move forward, right?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, so these are just some of those ideas. And I mean, as the director, I have to model vulnerability with the system. So my communications team said, you know what? One of the communication strategies that we think would really work is if you did this social media chat every week. So I go on in a format like this, but it's low tech. I'm just sitting with my computer in front of me. I'm getting questions from the system and I'm just answering them. And I'm saying, well, it doesn't look really polished. I'm not wearing my suit and my tie. And they say, right now, people don't care about that. They don't want to see that. They want to see you and you want to answer the question. And I'm saying, well, are you sure? Is this really what we're going to do? And I mean, I'm an educator. I'm not a media person. So there's vulnerability into doing that, right?
So much.
But I'm getting a tremendous amount of positive feedback, and I was only going to do it once. Now they're asking for me to do it on a weekly basis because I think people want to see that. And I'm giving you probably a long answer here, but another thing in terms of my philosophy of leadership when I came here is very easy when you move your way up a system to get detached from the actual real work of the system. So I made it a priority to try to make sure that every week I was getting out into schools, every week, multiple schools across the district, so that I could actually see what was happening and engage in conversations with staff, all staff, not just teaching staff, all staff, custodians, secretaries, EAs, and students, and find out really what's working and what's not working. And what I do once a month is I bring Riley, who's the academic associate director, and Jeff, the corporate associate director, and we do a full day of meetings as we're driving. And then we stop and we go see schools and we say, okay, this facility needs this kind of repair. Okay, get it. So that we're anchoring the decisions that we make up here with what the system needs out there, and constantly being visible and open and not trying to be above in a more traditional hierarchical sense, right? And so when we circle that back to masculinity, I think it is important to be strong and to be true to yourself, but to be respectful and treat people with respect. Those are some of those key things. And I will say that much of our current education system has not traditionally been set up for those students that identify as male, for that type of learner. And you even see in our stats, we have a workforce that's predominantly female. Yeah. And so one of the things I want to do here is to diversify our workforce, both from a gender perspective, but also we have a significant amount of Arabic and Muslim students. We have a significant number of Indigenous students, but we currently do not have a staff that is reflective of the community that we serve. So that's one of the things I'm going to do, is community outreach, to make sure that we're the largest school board in Southwestern Ontario. We're one of the largest employers in Southwestern Ontario. We want to make sure that this is a safe place for people to come and to work, and we want you to be part of what's going on here, right?
I just a sort of last thought is I really appreciate your example of sort of really stepping out of what may be your comfort zone in terms of doing these weekly sort of answering questions in a very informal sort of way, like an unpolished sort of way, and that you were like, really, but stepped out of your comfort zone and sat in the vulnerability of that, and it's turned out to be a good thing to do. And what it reminds me of is actually an article that was posted in the CTV News last night, specifically about political leaders and showing vulnerability at this time, and how important that has turned out to be. That to the public, right? That our political leaders are able to show some degree of humanity and their own vulnerability, and how it significantly impacts confidence that the public and the connection that the public can feel. So it's just a little piece of
Well,
what's going on.
I think right now people have less patience for artifice. I mean, they want what is real and what is
Yes.
authentic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I came up at a time too where, you know, the belief among senior educational leaders is that you really controlled access to the media and that you
Mhm.
needed to kind of draw or drive the narrative all the time. And really now, and even more so during this pandemic, is people want responsiveness. They want to see you. They want to hear from you. And right now they're less concerned, you know, about the other controls, and they want to see, you know, what I want people to know, and this is why this discussion has been so great. I've got parents, like you have parents that are elderly, that I'm worried about being exposed to COVID.
Right.
I've got kids, like you've got kids, that some of them are doing great with this emergency distance learning, and other take a little bit more support. And you know, I've got kids too that are missing their buddies. And I was out on the weekend with my son, and every weekend I go for long walks with him. And he's got a football, and he wants to. Why can't we go to the park and throw around the football, Dad? Right? And I
Yeah.
still have a hard time with that. So I said,
Oh, yeah.
and when we get back home, we'll throw the football around in the backyard. But the rule, this is the rule. Here's the big sign right here.
Yes.
And you know, we're going to try to do that. But you know, trying to be responsive. What does he need right now? He needs to get out with his dad. He needs to throw the ball around. He needs to move. He needs to get some fresh air, and he needs to, you know that, guess what? Eventually we'll be out and back in the parks again, and you will get through this. And then try to focus in, what is it that you're enjoying and liking about what's going on right now, and making sure that, you know, that he feels okay. And then also I try to use it as teaching moments for my kids to circle back to this concept of privilege. Like a lot of, if we talk about, you know, obviously I identify as a heterosexual white male, and I recognize that I have privilege, and that's not a negative thing, having privilege. It's really how you use that privilege is what the issue is, right? And so my whole philosophy, and you'll see more of this as we move the district forward, is that the role of the ally is equally important. And so as we broaden that and become more and more inclusive, that's not taking away something from any group. That's actually the strength in what we're doing here in our community. Our community is strong because of the diversity. That's why our enrollment is going up. That's why I believe we can be the best district in the entire province.
And isn't that just a great place to end our conversation? And I really and truly, Mark, I am like I said at the beginning, you've got a few things going on right now, so I am very, very grateful that you've taken this opportunity to spend a little bit of time with me and with everybody who's listening. Thank you for sharing.
During Mental Health Week, I've always been a huge believer in promoting well-being and wellness and having that as foundational to learning. And I applaud you for taking the initiative. So this is a great example. This is something you may or may not have thought of if we weren't having the pandemic. So now we're experiencing this. You've got a new avenue or mechanism to reach people, and I'm guessing that you'll probably continue doing this in some format moving forward. So this is a great example of the law of unintended consequences and something really positive coming out of what is a challenging situation for our community.
Out of necessity and adversity comes innovation and creativity sometimes. Isn't that true? Yeah. So, Mark, thank you so much for your time and your leadership and your courage and your vulnerability and your strength. We appreciate it as a system, and I am very grateful for your time. So thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure. All right, stay safe, stay well.
Yeah, you too. Take care.